Hello, everybody. My name is Andreas Borchert. I'm one of the founders and one of the two managing directors of PlanHorizon. Thank you very much for joining us here today for our second annual ServiceNow Strategic Portfolio Management Conference and spending some time here with us, learning from some of our customers, from James Ramsey from ServiceNow, and from some of my colleagues, and discussing things all around strategic portfolio management. So who is PlanHorizon? We are actually already about 16 years in the market. In all these 16 years, we always focused on the area of enterprise project portfolio management, resource management, agile methods, etc., etc. We have not done this 17 years with ServiceNow. So in the past, we also worked with some of the well-known tools in this market space, which we are now replacing with ServiceNow Strategic Portfolio Management. We work with ServiceNow as a pure play partner since almost 7 years. We are one of the very few partners worldwide, probably the only one, to my knowledge, it might be true, the only one who's actually focusing very much on the strategic portfolio management, on consulting and implementation all around this module. The next presentation we have in line is a presentation by my colleague, Dr. Thorsten Frey. So I think I met Thorsten the first time about 10 years ago. At that time, he was a PhD candidate at the Technical University of Darmstadt. He was actually the advisor for some of our master students who did their master thesis in the area of project portfolio management. So Thorsten did his PhD in project portfolio management. So he's truly an expert with a lot of process and consulting background. And now he has been 9 years with us already. Time flies. He hasn't changed a bit from the outside. And so he was made our head of strategic portfolio management practice this year, and he fills this role really great. And with that introduction, over to you, Thorsten. Please share some of your learnings and best practices about introducing strategic portfolio management.
Right, yes, thank you very much. And I want to give some insights from practice. So maybe a few words about me. So as Andreas said, I joined PlanHorizon 9 years ago. I've been introducing quite a lot of project management solutions, different solutions. So as Andreas mentioned, we were not always working together with ServiceNow. So I also had some experiences with Oracle and Clarity, etc. But since 7 years now, we have introduced a multitude of SPM solutions, and I'm still working as a project manager. I'm leading engagements at larger customers, and so what I would like to do is to share some of the learnings we have, and I think that cycles back to what James said, and also what we learned from Allianz. So I think we make the same experiences everywhere about good practices, bad practices, and I would like to go briefly through ServiceNow SPM introduction projects, rollout projects, the journey you typically have, and what I would recommend to do, what I've seen what works good, and what I've seen what is often skipped. With that, I would like to start into a few best practices. So the first thing I will highlight is when you start introducing SPM, no matter where you come from, it's always important first to start with really defining the objectives, the desirable outcomes you have. Very often in our projects, customers approach us and say, okay, we want to introduce SPM, we want to do that quickly. We ask the question, why do we want to do that? Yeah, because we have tool XYZ, we want to get rid of that. Or we want to have these use cases covered. Yeah, so it's very often people tend to jump into the solution very often, and that's a natural thing, but it makes it quite hard sometimes to do what we discussed, to stay out of the box, to understand the core processes in SPM, also to do the change that is often comes along with a new solution, with a new platform. And that's why I would advise always start thinking about some main objectives you have, like we want to get more transparency, we want to become more agile, yeah, and really not only do that on the paper, but also spread the word in the organization and explain people that's why we are introducing SPM. Even if you only want to get rid of a legacy solution, but that's also a good reason to explain why you want to do that. That's quite important, because else if you start with the requirements, people will focus very much on what they have now and will try to push existing systems, existing processes into the system, because that's what you have and that's tangible to you. Yeah. And in order to avoid that, it's very important at the beginning to involve leadership, because very often I face a situation that you say, okay, that's a process we currently have. Yeah, well, okay, that would be a better process in ServiceNow. Can we move into that direction? Yeah, we don't know. We don't know because we don't know what our leadership thinks about it. So that's why it's very important to have the leadership involved in the project, at least at the beginning. Yeah, you need both sides from my perspective. You need subject matter experts, process experts who know the process by heart, who also do the communication to people, but you also need leadership involvement in order to be able to change processes. Next best practice is it's very important to understand the capabilities of SPM. So you have different capabilities in there with demand management, project management, time tracking, a lot of different process areas, different capabilities, and they are all a bit different in nature. So if you look at demand management, that's highly configurable, yeah? And it's also, I think it's made for configuration, because the processes are always very different. Yeah, so you have different supporting functions involved very often. You have different approval processes. You play it hard, you play it soft. So that's quite different. And you have that's something where you can add on top. You can change certain parts. If you compare that to resource management, for example, resource management has a quite defined process in ServiceNow. It's like you plan the resources, you request the resources get confirmed and allocated. What you can define is how you run this process in your organization, and what you can also define is the data behind that and how you structure your groups, etc. But a very, very different approach, and that's why it's very important to understand these modules before you start to roll them out, because very often see customers who really spend a lot of time on defining how the ideal process would look like without seeing the system first time, and that usually leads to a mismatch of expectations. Yeah, and that's why it's very important, even if you have special requirements, etc., to understand and know the out of the box state and compare to this state at the beginning. And what is also important is to understand the relationships between these different modules. Yeah, so there are many capabilities you can introduce independently of each other, but it doesn't make sense usually to introduce resource management if you don't have projects or demands or other tasks in your system. Yeah, so it relates to something. Yeah. Once you have understood your the capabilities of ServiceNow, and I think it's always a feedback loop. Yeah, you look at the base capabilities, you look at your processes, and you try to match both parts. Yeah, and once you have a good understanding of that, I think one thing I would always recommend is to define your own roadmap. I think that's different for every customer. For Allianz, we have heard there are two parts to it. It's one thing is rolling out capabilities, and the other part is including new stakeholder groups, yeah, expanding it throughout the organization. And so you can grow in both directions. What you see here is it's not a perfect roadmap. It's not what I would recommend. It's just an example, yeah. But typically, what you can do very well with ServiceNow is you can move step by step. Yeah, I like this notion of crawl, walk, run. You have that in other areas also in ITSM, for example. So it's like starting at the basics, learning how the platform works, including maybe initially only a few stakeholder groups, and then growing the platform throughout the organization. And what worked quite successfully, or at least for me, worked very well in larger organizations, is that you have really many iterations or projects, smaller projects with a clear focus, like we want to become more agile, we want to address the cost dimension properly, yeah, and that brings more focus to the organization. You can also roll out SPM full-fledged. We had that for smaller customers. It can also be quite successful, and then you start with a smaller part of the organization. If you're in a large organization, you have so much organizational change management, you have so much organizational learning involved, and so you have to build up a governance. So in this case, typically you want to go really step by step, yeah, and grow with the tool. We've already talked a lot of out of the box, yeah. So I think that has a bit changed over time. When I look at SPM or ITBM formally 6 years ago, it was still evolving, and many customers were adding on top, and some capabilities were missing, etc. Nowadays, you see it's quite complete, and you see you get great workspaces introduced, you get new capabilities which bring a lot of functionality out of the box. And if you now introduce ServiceNow, in ServiceNow you have great abilities to configure, to change things. Most rules, etc., are open to you to be changed, but you should be very careful doing that. I often see that companies try to touch the core logic, for example, behind resource management, etc., and that usually ends up in a cascade of changes. So if you want to grow your organization, if you want to involve additional stakeholder groups, it's quite important to really have one standard and not to build in too much customizations for smaller stakeholder groups. What you also should consider is the dependencies to other applications, as we said. So if you have out of the box SPM installation, you will have relationships into applications, into strategies, goals, etc. I often see that customers say, okay, let's get rid of that because we are not using that. I think that's also fine initially, but you should grow into that, to have these relationships, to make use of the data, to relate the data to each other, to relate the processes to each other, because that's where the value of ServiceNow comes from. Yeah. What you can do very well is add specific processes on top. So what I often see is you can add approval processes, for example, yeah, which sit on top of what is there. You can add lessons learned processes. You can add change management processes, for example. You can use request management in ServiceNow very well if you have specific processes and want to manage these kinds of requests. Interfaces are a good part, but I would always recommend to try to stay close to the standard and add customizations on top if required. What we've also seen, I think we have seen that at Wacker, we have seen that at Allianz, we've seen that at many other customers. ServiceNow is great if you want to have a flexible approach, if you want to do POCs, if you want to run pilots, for example. Usually you have different instances. So what I've seen very often is that you first try out a new feature on one of the sub instances. You test it with a small stakeholder group, you gain experiences, and the great thing about these additional plugins is you can activate them step by step and expand as the organization learns. Yeah. I think that's quite successful. And if you find out, okay, it's one capability is not what you expected, or you don't have the maturity, then it's good to at least explore it and then learn and understand and fail fast, instead of defining, specifying, thinking of how could you push that into the system. Yeah, so I always recommend to use the chance to gain experience with the system. one very important aspect, and I think that also changed a bit over time, is the importance of data. Yeah, so in IT service management, initially there was no customer, no CSDM, no common services data model, and I think that was a huge challenge for many companies, because everybody built up their own model, their own data model. In SPM, we don't have. Of course, SPM also has a data model behind, but it's not as specific as the common services data model. But still, there's a lot of organizational data behind that. There's a lot of financial data. There's a lot of portfolio data, etc. And I see very often in practice, customers struggle with that. Yeah, struggling in general with maintaining data, have good master data. But it's worth the effort to think about the data, how your organization looks like, how you want to represent that in the system, how your business units are structured, because that is relevant for reporting, that is relevant for new application areas, new capabilities like the alignment planner workspace, and so that is something to spend time on. And I have a lot of discussions with customers about data, how to structure the organization. And what we see very often is when customers introduce IT service management, and now they are moving on to strategic portfolio management, these aspects have not probably been addressed. Departments have been imported from Active Directory or somewhere else, and that's something definitely it's important to get that under control over time. If you do that right from the beginning, it's great. I also know customers who have master data stewards and who are spending really a lot of time to getting the data right. Yeah. And I think that's what you should do, because then you get real value out of the platform. You can use it for many areas in your organization. Another best practice is reporting. Yeah, so SPM, of course, reporting is very important for strategic portfolio management. You have the financial dimension. You want to know where the resources are. You want to have your KPIs. How long does a demand take on average, etc. So these are typical examples. But quite often, reporting requirements are discussed quite late. They are postponed because you first want to learn how the system is working, and then you want to build reports on top. That's something I would recommend to discuss reporting early on in the process. Even though if you don't set up all your reporting, it's important to see into which direction you want to go reporting wise. Yeah. Because then you can already see if you have the relevant data in the system, if you want to add additional fields to capture data. On the other hand, you should not exaggerate. So I see a lot of companies who are very reporting driven, and then they push a lot of information into demands, and projects and project managers and demand managers have to, or stakeholders have to provide a lot of information for reporting purposes only, and that's not fostering the adoption, to be honest. Yeah, so in this case, it's really important to think about what are the key KPIs, what do we want to learn from strategic portfolio management, what we currently don't know, and then make sure that you collect this data early on. What is also valuable is there are out-of-the-box dashboards readily available. Of course, they make use of out-of-the-box field, and not everything is relevant at the beginning. Yeah, not, of course, it's the full-fledged solution, and usually you don't use all these elements, but it's still worthwhile to take a look at these dashboards and move into that direction, I think, because the more ServiceNow is becoming really a standard solution, and I think it is right now, yeah, the more it is also important to have standard data model behind that. If you look at use cases like benchmarking, for example, that heavily relies on customers having the same data model behind them. Yeah, once you have rolled out SPM, I think the typical the main challenges you always have, I think, is to make sure that the system has a high degree of usability and a high performance. Yeah. So PPM stakeholders, they usually expect a high degree of usability because they often have the chance they can use the system heavily and rely on the system, or they can do what is required only in the system. And that will depend very much on usability and performance. And I think the way to have high usability is not implementing specific processes for each user group. Yeah, so often have user groups who say, okay, I like ServiceNow, but it doesn't fit my requirements perfectly. Could you please add this additional field or this additional information for me? So you do local optimization in this way. I think that will in the end provide bad usability. So it's really important to keep a lean system and make sure that the system stays open for additional stakeholder groups, keep it as generic as possible. And regarding performance, special learning is ServiceNow does not come with a permission model, so you can define your own permission model. Or at least there is a permission model, but you have a very flexible in ServiceNow how you want to define that. And that is great, but on the other hand, you should not get too specific with these permissions because that can have a huge performance impact in the end. So it's a good idea to think about a very generic permission model that serves the data protection purposes you have, but not be too specific about it, because every time you open a new project or demand or whatever, permissions are checked. And I've seen many customers who approach us and say, okay, we have introduced SPM, but it's so slow. And it's often because of failed permission models. I think the last best practice is once it's perfectly rolled out, and already when you're starting to think about introducing SPM, it's important to think about the governance model behind that, because we have, as we've learned from Allianz, also usually there are many stakeholder groups. Yeah? So I know another large customer where you have different departments involved: risk management, portfolio management, demand management, resource management, etc. So these are all different parties, and it's important to think about how do you manage these different stakeholder groups, and how do you ensure that you still have alignment within the system, so that the different parts fit together, work together, and how do you address their different needs and make still sure that the requirements are aligned with each other. And as we already said, what is also very important to make sure that you have training, update sessions, so you have quite a lot of different stakeholder groups in SPM, and it is very important that they understand the platform. So it's now very often for new stakeholders, it's overwhelming because you have so many capabilities, but I think with good training, people finally like the platform and really make good use of it. And the last thing, I think you have to find a way. So it's quite challenging in practice, but once you have SPM rolled out, there will be continuous demands, requirements, and usually you get a lot of small requests for small changes. We would like to improve this or that, or we would like to add a specific process for one area, versus quite huge topics like taking alive the alignment planner workspace, changing the way portfolio management is conducted, etc. And you have to find a balance between these requirements. So you can't, of course, you can't reject all these small changes, because that also keeps stakeholder groups satisfied. But it's quite important to leave room and focus on huge initiatives that really bring you forward with ServiceNow SPM. Final slide here. Yeah, so that's the general environment you're usually facing. We had some of these topics mentioned in the questions and answers already. So I think implementing the solution from a technical point of view and from process point of view, that's only a small part of what you're facing. You have a lot of influencing factors like the organizational culture, how you're worker council is working, data protection can be a very, very influencing topic, etc. And that will shape the way your solution will look like in the end. And it's really important to manage that and to explain to people why these factors are influencing the platform and how they are influencing. And a huge aspect in introducing strategic portfolio management is really organizational change management. So when you start introducing SPM, I think initially you often face resistance. You have worries. You have people who are used to a different system, etc. And that's something you have to actively manage. You have to convince people, why are you introducing SPM? Why are you moving from point solutions to a platform? What will be the benefit for the organization? I think that's really critical in your SPM journey. Yeah, that is from my side, and I'm looking forward very much to questions.
Thank you very much, Thorsten. Great stuff. Yeah, the organization, the soft stuff is the hard stuff. I think someone, either Thomas or me, we came up with that like 10 or 12 years ago. I think this is also an important aspect where SPM is very different from other modules. Of course, there's organizational change management in general with ServiceNow, but I would imagine with ITOM or SecOps, not so much. With SPM, it is quite extreme because resource management, investment funding means also power shifts. And of course, everybody says, I want transparency, but not everybody really wants it. So that is a bit different with this module. Let's take a look at Q&A. There are a couple of questions. First one, what would be a strategy to come back to out-of-the-box SPM when you are already using a heavily customized SPM installation, which might currently use some features differently as intended? Very good questions. I can partially answer that. We have a lot of experience with that. We have seen that a lot in the market, unfortunately. And maybe Thorsten, you can say a couple of words about that, and maybe even also Daniel, my colleague Daniel, who has a lot of experience with that, also wants to chip in with the answer there.
Yeah, I'll just jump in right away. One of the challenges, so this is always a challenge, and getting back to out of the box, as we also talked about in the Allianz presentation, is important in order to leverage new functionality that ServiceNow delivers going ahead. I think one of the main challenges there, customizations don't happen just because people wanted to customize. So typically, there's process requirements, there's business requirements behind the customization, and the very first step of the journey is to take these business stakeholders along, explain to them, demonstrate to them what the new functionalities are, what the new possibilities are that they're gaining, and actually making clear to people that you're not taking stuff away from them, but you're actually allowing them to use more and use more modern and more advanced functionalities going ahead. This was also the main driver and the main leverage that we had at Allianz Technology, where we said we've customized, in some parts, maybe we've customized ourselves into a corner, but if we revert back out, then if we go back to sort of the last known good configuration, then there's a clear path ahead for new functionality, for rolling out interactive planning, interactive resource management, all things that Allianz had, let's say, customized themselves out of. So it's usually less of a technical journey, or less of a technical challenge than a process and business and stakeholder challenge, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, in most of the cases, you have to do that step by step. Yeah. So for example, I've often inherited demand management processes which got out of control, because more and more, so it happens over time, more and more supporting functions, stakeholders, etc., joined, and they all wanted to participate, want to be represented in the process. Yeah. And the first thing is really to talk about, is it really necessary in this way? Are there alternatives? So you have to, if you want to get back, you have to talk with the different stakeholders. You have to convince them first that it is important to get back to the standard. And then you can go step by step. Sometimes it's a lot of fields that have been added. Sometimes it's a lot of logic to be added, and you have to review that. And yeah, what we did is deactivating things step by step, seeing what is the impact. Is it really hurting somebody? And then you will very often find there is no resistance against that, because you find out it has not been used at all. But it depends very much. I think there are also good reasons, as I said, why so many custom things have been added, because the system has grown over time. Now it's much more capable than initially. But I think what we have seen from James, yeah, if you say into which direction SPM is going, if you show that to stakeholders, hopefully they will understand why it's a good idea to to get back to the standard and make use of these great features.
Yeah, what we have often seen when a customer approached that and he had a heavily customized SPM system already, this came in existence very often because it was a combined wish list of many different departments. So basically, okay, we want to do all this. So one of our most important job, of Daniel's job and Thorsten's job, is no, this is not a good idea. We would rather discuss, where do you want to go? Let's do it like this. Let's stay to the standard. By the way, we do offer ServiceNow SPM health checks to do an analysis and make some recommendations how you can get back to standards. They are different from the ServiceNow health checks you probably know, which are more great stuff, but very different thing on the technical level. But ours is more about going into the consulting mode and do this thing. One more question here. What effort is there in migrating data from a legacy to SPM? That's an interesting one.
Yeah, I can try to pick that up. So of course, it depends very much what your legacy system is, and it also depends if you want to migrate. Yeah, so there are different strategies. Sometimes you don't want to migrate because it's you have a completely different data model behind that. What I can say is ServiceNow has good capabilities to integrate data, technical capabilities. If you look at import sets, etc., I think that's not the problem. The data model behind that can be a problem. And what you typically do is to take a look at the data you have and think of what do you really want to migrate. So usually I'm not migrating 100%. So to give you an example, migrated for one customer from Clarity to ServiceNow, and they are mainly using Clarity for time tracking purposes. So what we did, we migrated the projects, we migrated the rate matrices, the tasks, etc. What we did not migrate, for example, is the past the track times. We decided, okay, there's one point in time when we switch from one system to another one, and we don't want to move all that data over to the new platform.